Tonight, we delve into the kind of fear that seeps into your bones, not with a jump scare, but with the slow, insidious dread of being utterly alone, and yet undeniably watched. This isn't just a story. It's a chilling account sent to us by a viewer named Sarah, a testament to the fact that some places just hold on to things that refuse to stay buried, things that don't want you there. Sarah's story begins like so many others looking for a fresh start. She'd inherited an old farmhouse in rural Vermont from a great aunt she'd barely remembered. It was isolated, tucked away at the end of a long, winding dirt road, surrounded by dense woods. A place where the silence was so profound it almost hummed, a deep, resonant hush that seemed to absorb all other sounds, leaving only the faint echo of one's own racing thoughts. Sarah, after a messy breakup and the suffocating pace of city life, saw it as a sanctuary, a quiet haven to heal, to breathe, to simply be, a refuge from the mundane horrors of the known world. When she first arrived, the house was exactly as she'd imagined, charmingly rustic, full of character. Dusty antique furniture, faded floral wallpaper, the scent of aged wood and forgotten lavender. It felt like stepping back in time, a tranquil escape. She spent the first few weeks painting, cleaning, just settling in. The days were long and peaceful, filled with the sounds of nature, bird song, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream. At night it was pitch black, save for the moon filtering through the tall pines, and the silence was absolute. She loved it. She truly did. But then, things started. Small things at first, things she easily dismissed. The house was old, after all. It groaned, it settled. That's what old houses do, right? She'd hear a faint creak from upstairs when she was downstairs, alone. A gentle tap, like a branch against a window, but there was no wind. Sometimes she'd catch a fleeting glimpse of something in her peripheral vision, a shadow that moved too quickly, a shape just beyond the edge of her sight. She'd turn, and there would be nothing but an empty hallway, a dusty corner. Her mind playing tricks, she'd tell herself. Exhaustion, new surroundings. One evening, while reading in the living room, a book suddenly slid off the mantelpiece with a soft thud. It wasn't leaning precariously, she'd placed it there herself, flat. Sarah jumped, heart hammering, then laughed it off. Just the house settling, she murmured, picking it up. A few days later, she found a small porcelain doll, one she'd inherited from her great aunt, face down on the kitchen floor. It had been sitting on a high shelf in the dining room. No way it could have fallen from there. This time, she didn't laugh. A cold knot started to form in her stomach. The incidents grew more frequent, more deliberate. One night she was woken by what sounded distinctly like children's laughter, faint but clear, coming from the attic directly above her bedroom. Not playful, innocent laughter, but something else, something brittle. She sat bolt upright, heart pounding against her ribs. She was alone in the house, always alone. She tried to rationalize it, a dream, an owl, something in the woods, but the laughter lingered, a ghost in the quiet. She pulled the covers tighter, not daring to move, until the first rays of dawn finally pierced the darkness. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Every night, the house would come alive. Footsteps dragged across the floorboards upstairs, heavy and slow, like someone pacing, or something. Whispers would slither into her ears, just at the edge of hearing, almost her name. Sarah, she'd strain to hear, but the sound would vanish, leaving her with only the ringing silence and a crushing sense of dread. She'd often wake to find objects subtly rearranged, a kitchen knife laid across the cutting board when she swore she'd put it in the drawer. Her favorite mug moved from the counter to the floor beside her bed. It felt like a sick game. Someone was messing with her. She started locking doors she knew were already locked, checking windows over and over. She even bought motion-activated cameras, placing them strategically around the house. For days, they captured nothing but her own lonely movements. The house seemed to hold its breath when the cameras were on, only to resume its torment the moment she turned them off, or when she was in a different room. The psychological toll was immense. She was constantly on edge, jumpy at every shadow, every creak. Her peace had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating paranoia. The worst part was the cold. There were specific spots in the house where the air would suddenly drop to an icy chill, even with the heating on full blast. A bone-aching cold that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It often happened in the hallway leading to the attic or right beside her bed at night. It felt like a presence, a cold breath on her neck. She started sleeping with a heavy blanket wrapped tightly around her, regardless of the temperature in the room. One particularly dark and stormy night, the power flickered and died. The house was plunged into absolute blackness. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee through the old eaves. Sarah fumbled for her flashlight, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. The familiar sounds of the storm outside were almost a comfort, better than the terrifying silence of the house. She was in her bedroom, trying to calm her racing heart, when she heard it, a distinct scratching sound. It wasn't outside. It was coming from inside her bedroom wall, directly behind her headboard. A slow, deliberate scrape, like fingernails dragging across rough plaster. Sarah froze, flashlight beam fixed on the wall, her breath catching in her throat. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like something trapped, desperate to get out. It sounded wet now somehow, slimy, then a sickening thump, and the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm, more profound than any she'd ever experienced. It pressed in on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She held her breath, straining her ears, desperate for any sound, any explanation. And then she heard it, a heavy, measured drag sound. It was coming from the attic, directly above her. Slowly, deliberately, it moved from one side of the attic to the other, a dragging, scraping weight. It wasn't the kind of sound a person would make. It was too cumbersome, too deliberate. Panic seized her. She squeezed her eyes shut, a silent plea for it all to be a dream. But when she opened them again, the dragging sound had stopped. Everything was still, too still. And then, clear as a bell, so close it felt like a breath against her skin, she heard it. Her name, Sarah. It was a whisper, but it wasn't faint. It was right there, right next to her ear, icy and malevolent. It wasn't human. It was distorted, elongated, a sound woven from static and pure dread. The cold spot that had often visited her in the night now enveloped her entirely, a shroud of Arctic air that made her shiver uncontrollably. Her eyes snapped to the bedroom door. It was closed, but as she watched, slowly, agonizingly, it began to creak open. Just a sliver at first, then wider, revealing nothing but the inky blackness of the hallway beyond. She could feel something watching her from that void, a pressure, a focus that was palpable. She didn't wait. A primal scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. She scrambled out of bed, tripping over the blanket, her flashlight beam dancing wildly around the room. She fumbled for the doorknob, her fingers slick with sweat, her mind screaming, "Get out, get out, get out." As she yanked the door open, she saw it, not clearly, not distinctly, but enough. A shape in the darkness of the hallway, too tall, too thin, standing in the doorway of her bedroom, bathed in the faint, flickering light from the storm outside that momentarily broke through the windows. It seemed to sway, just slightly, a silent, unblinking sentinel. Sarah didn't even register what it was. She just knew it was wrong, utterly, terrifyingly wrong. She bolted down the stairs, her feet pounding, heart threatening to explode from her chest. The house seemed to actively work against her. A light flickered on and off in the living room as she passed, blinding her for a split second. A door slammed shut somewhere upstairs, echoing through the house. The air grew thick, heavy, as if resisting her escape. She reached the front door, clawing at the lock, her hands numb with terror. It wouldn't turn, it was stuck. She sobbed, a guttural sound of pure desperation. She heard a soft thump from the top of the stairs, then the distinct, slow drag beginning again. Closer this time. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, she threw her entire weight against the door. The old wood splintered, the lock burst, and she stumbled out into the driving rain, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone, but utterly oblivious to the cold. She didn't look back, she didn't dare. She just ran, blindly, through the mud and the dark, toward the distant promise of the main road. She never went back to that farmhouse, not once. She sold it sight unseen, for a pittance, to some eager developer who probably thought he'd found a fixer-upper gem. She never told anyone the full story, not really. How could she? How could she explain the scratching in the walls, the cold breath, the whispered name, the tall, thin shadow in the dark? They'd think she was mad. Sarah lives in a small apartment now, miles away from Vermont. She still struggles with sleep. Every creak of the floorboards in her new building, every faint whisper of the wind outside her window, sends a jolt of icy fear through her. She hears her name sometimes, just at the edge of her hearing, when she's alone in the silence. That cold spot still visits her, occasionally, in her new bedroom. Because some things, some entities, once they've touched you, once they've shown you what truly lurks in the dark here, they don't just stay in the old house. They follow you, they wait. And they remind you always that you're never truly alone. What did she truly escape that night? Or did she just bring its ancient, insidious essence with her?